Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Mental Wealth Podcast. My name is Will Fleming.
And I'm Akirei Maricela Thompson. Marole, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Season 1 of our Mental Wealth Podcast, proudly sponsored and brought to you by Foundation North. My name is Inu Akirei Maricela Thompson, and here with my awesome colleague.
Yeah, my name is Will Fleming.
And we're here with an exciting guest this afternoon who's graced us with his awesome time. But Toko, I'll get you to introduce yourself, please, for our audience.
Whawhetai Inu. My name is Kennedy Maeakafa Fakana'ana'a-ki-Fualu, also known as the Tongan Robin Hood.
Nice, nice.
It's awesome to have you here, brother. We've talked many times on the phone, in person, but there's something special about recording and documenting our journeys together and celebrating the work you do. And I think this podcast is created, well, it definitely is created to celebrate our people. Kenny, what is it that you tell people you do? Because Tongan Robin Hood is the kind of myth behind it, but on the ground floor, what do you do?
I wear many hats. And I guess one that I can't take off is the role of an activist. I mean, he mentioned, I remember the last time we caught up, Will, we went through the history behind the so-called Tongan Robin Hood. Started way back in 1987 when I joined the Inland Revenue Department. And then from there, instead of the so-called civil servants, I left. I turned into an activist. But I guess that is the essence of the Tongan Robin Hood is first and foremost an activist, besides many other hats that I wear.
You mentioned activists. I'm just reading here that there were some big hopes for you. I see on your principal wrote, because you're one of the only accredited entrants into uni. And on your final report, your school principal said, Kennedy, you are blessed with a good brain, so go use it. But then things changed for you. What changed for you, and what diverted your entrance into university? Because being a Pasifika young person at the time, entering university, even today's numbers aren't very good. So having had that ability to do that back in the days would have been awesome. But explain to us what transpired.
Yeah, if I may start from 1980. 1980, I was 11 years old at the time, and my father came over to Tonga, and pretty much forced me and my younger brother to migrate to New Zealand. And I did not want to come to New Zealand at the time, you know. My grandmother was still alive in Tonga, and I did not want to leave her behind. So coming across, in Tonga, similar to Samoa and the other Pacific Island nations or Polynesian nations, and, it takes a village to raise a child. And that was very deep within the culture and the upbringing back in Tonga. And to, suddenly be forced to migrate to New Zealand. And I mean, we all, we all know what it's like to leave home and then come into a new country where the culture is different. So even from 1980, I was a bit of a rebel. I guess it's similar to you. We were young. There was a lot of influence back then. Even with what they call now the hip hop music. I mean, in the beginning it was just called rap, and we had that influence from America, the Sugar Hill Gang and all that coming across. So there was a bit of a black music influence for a young Polynesian growing up in South Auckland. So then, a few years later, or 4 years later, 1985, I was accredited UE, and I was one of only 2 people from the whole school that got accredited. Again, that rebel spirit was still there. When I was expected to enroll into the University of Auckland in 1986, I chose a different path. And by the way, Will, I talked about this with you before. I do not regret choosing a different path. Instead of enrolling at the University of Auckland, I decided to get married. I was only 18 years old at the time. But again, it's that rebel, inner person, being young, being forced to come into a new culture, and we must admit there are cultural conflicts, intergenerational conflicts. So that was a bit hard on a young person, and hence I just wanted to, my parents wanted me to enroll at uni. I said no. I want to, go a different path. And when I met my wife, I decided, to get married instead of listening to my parents. And I do see it as maybe a blessing in disguise that I did marry my wife, Sandra, because she is pretty much the person that kept me grounded with the Tongan culture. It was hard. It was hard. You could easily, go with the flow and the influence of things like the youth gangs back then. It was strong. I grew up in Mangere. The KCs were around at that time, and there was just too much influence. But I guess I kind of escaped the gang culture because I chose to get married. So again, I don't regret, what I chose, but maybe, it's been a roller coaster ride. You have to admit.
Yeah.
But then, we all face adversities, and what we must do is to be able to rise above and cope with those adversities. We all have our struggles, That's a common thing about us Polynesians, is we come into a new country. It's a different culture. There are conflicts, but we just have to cope.
Yeah. Kenny, one of the things that strikes me about your story too is, I guess there's no roadmap when you try and go your own way. And I love that about you. It's like, it's not just the advocacy for people. It's the fact that you're brave enough to challenge people when you need to, that you're brave enough to think, I don't know what the goal is here always in every step, but I think we're doing it for the right reasons. And I think it's cool because that kind of spirit has been coming through on the podcast, right? We're talking to many business owners, community leaders, and one of the things that comes through, Ray, maybe you have some ideas on this too, is that, it's not like following a list of things to do, eh? You've got to learn as you go. And so there's something. Are you kind of comfortable with that, Kenny? Are you comfortable with learning as you go?
I think we have to adapt. Sometimes if you set some really, let's say, solid or hard goals in life, and then things get in the way, and if you're not able to adapt quickly, it could, especially from a mental well-being or mental health perspective, it can go against you. But if you're able to adapt quickly, I find that that you can continue. I mean, we talked about the times at the IRD. There's something that I hardly talk about this, but I will never forget some of the information or some of the things that I was exposed to while working for the tax department. I was 18 at the time. And to get like memos and even find out that there has been taxpayers who have taken their own lives because of some of the let's say the policies and procedures by the government departments. They were shocking. I found that very hard to take, and it's I guess most of the time it is suppressed. And I remember back in those times, there were, and I still think it happens today. When taxpayers, when they fail to file income tax returns, most times they get hit with what was called back then default assessments. Default assessments. And of course, majority of the people will be able to cope with it and question it and argue that, hey, I did not work during those 5 years that you're claiming that, I was working. So, but then on the other hand, you get some of those taxpayers who are just, they're taken in awe. They're shocked and they think it's real, but they're just default assessments. But those are the ones that I really feel for, and for me as a public servant or civil servant, I said to myself, I can't be here. I can't be here working for a government department that drives some people to commit suicide. That was shocking, but that's the reality of the world we live in. So as an 18-year-old, and I was going, no, this is not right. I can't be supporting a system like this. And again, I did challenge the system when I was working there. For example, both of you may well know that a lot of our Polynesians, they all belong to one church or another. In that culture there, we have to make donations to the church. And back at the time, there was a ruling by the tax regulation at the time that you can only claim, or one person can claim 1/3 of the amount. And I can still remember a lot of our Tongans were getting one receipt from the church. For an example, a receipt for 5,000. So I made an argument, to support these taxpayers that even though there's only one receipt with the amount of 5,000, it's a family donation. So I went ahead and argued that the husband should claim, part of it, the wife should claim part of it, and also the children who are working should also claim part of it. And I guess, they changed the rules later, but I was one of those that was challenging the system all the time. In 1987, there was also an amnesty for the overstayers. So I would prioritize these poor overstayers. There were ways, or there were loopholes to be able to give them IRD numbers, so I went ahead and did that, when they opened up the amnesty, I used up all my sick leaves and there was no more leave left. So I decided to apply for leave without pay in order to have time to queue up at the immigration office in the city to be able to file permanent residencies for these poor overstayers. And that was like 1987. Since the COVID, I found myself going back into trying to help the overstayers. So, and it's still ongoing. It's we've taken a petition to Parliament. I've made an argument that has been politicized. Now we're looking at Plan B, but I don't want to say any more about Plan B because it's in a pipeline.
Yeah, and I guess, Kenny, it's nothing. The stuff you're referring to is loopholes, so it's legal, but it's like what we're talking about with the overstays. You've described to me, these are people in the shadows, and it's this grey area which we're talking about, right? It's not right and wrong, it's what's necessary to be done. And I guess the challenge with being a activist is sometimes people don't remember that you were fighting for this in the 80s, and only now as someone else comes up with it and says, oh, yes, we changed that. But it was the fighters like you who were advocating for people then, as you are now, right?
In 1986, a good friend of mine who has passed away, he was advocating for a free visa, and we did get it. So in 1986, thousands of Tongans came across under that free visa deal. So in 87, there were thousands of Tongan overstayers, right? And again, I guess when COVID hit us in 2020, it's for me, it's the thought that even the New Zealand-born children or the overstayers were going to bed on empty stomachs. And when the overstayers cried out for help, I had to step up to the plate. And I'm sure that you too would also do the same if the overstayers cried out to you too. So it was only natural as a Polynesian to do what you can to help.
You mentioned 2020, the beginning of COVID, and it's 2022 now. Where are we at? What's the community need? Are things better, worse? Is it too hard to answer that?
Well, I mean, with our current situation, 2022, it's we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and for me, I have to be optimistic. I can't dwell on the negative. So for me, I'm every day the overstayers are connecting, either through the mobile phone or they message me on Facebook, and I have to remember that it's my job to give them hope. On the other hand, I have to tell the truth. So there has to be a balance. So I have to explain to them, what we've come through, even the petition that we took to Wellington, and again I have to remind them that there's always a way. They say that if there's a will, there's always a way. And even if I have to let them know that, because some of them are saying, oh, hey, so there's no hope. And I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there is hope. And then they go further. What is the hope? How about if there's no amnesty? And you have to be, again, optimistic and let them know, okay, if there's no amnesty, the last hope is Section 61. and a lot of people don't know about Section 61. That under compassionate grounds, a person, especially these the well-settled overstayers, and we're talking about, families they've been here for over 10 years, 20 years, and some of those, the children were born in New Zealand, and yet they're still called overstayers, even the children. So those well-settled families should be given priority, either if there's an amnesty or pathways to residency. But again, to answer your question, Will, hey, we just have to be optimistic, and we can't, hope is something that is needed. So I've always given these overstayers hope, even though deep down, I know it's a long road. The so-called reset, they called it rebalance. It's still not here. So there's still hope, and that's the message that I continue to give the vulnerable overstayers, especially the ones from Tonga. I can't help everyone, but again, there are about 15,000 overstayers, according to the stats that was given to us by Immigration New Zealand. And out of those 15,000, Tonga is at the top with about 2,500 overstayers. So again, the Tongans have the most overstayers in New Zealand, and it was a challenge. It was a challenge for me to be able to convince the everyday New Zealander, the Kiwis, that we should not box these overstayers up with let's say the hardcore criminals. No, majority of these overstayers are children. So the initiative that I started, I gave it the name. Because at the time, remember the 25th, 26th of March, 2020. The message was loud and clear from our Honourable Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, be kind. So I decided to give it a bit of a twist and say, be kind to overstayers. So the initiative that I started, I gave it that name, Be Kind to Overstayers. And I think it worked, People don't look at the overstayers, especially from a within the Polynesian community. Now that they're starting to see that the overstayers are, they could be living next door to you, but you won't know, right? They're living in secret. Even some who are working, paying taxes, So you wouldn't really know, who's an overstayer. And then you got the vulnerable ones. They're moving, they're living in garages, and that's really sad. That I remember I did a radio interview, and the interviewer talked about the previous week when a family from around the Pukekohe area, they called in, and told the interviewer that every time they hear the voice of the Tongan Robin Hood, it keeps them warm, even though they're living in a shed, in a steel garage that is cold as. But whenever they hear the voice of the Tongan Robin Hood, it gives them hope. It keeps them warm, even though it's really cold. So that's the hope that I continue to offer our vulnerable overstayers. It's a hard road, and it's, you're standing up, and sometimes you're on your own. But what else can you do?
That's right.
We just have to persist and be optimistic.
Kennedy. Some hardcore work you're doing, brother, and I appreciate you sharing all of that. And it's just amazing because it's a road that generally, as you just summed up towards the end there, sometimes you're on your own. But even on your own, you can provide hope for more of our people that are living there in harsh conditions, you know, in the tin shed, you know, with probably 9, 10 other people, members of the family. So you've talked about all the advocacy work the amazing advocacy work that you're doing. So I can see exactly why you've been dubbed the Tongan Robin Hood. But I just want to visit and discuss more about you, Toko. You talked about all the awesome work that you're doing for other people, but I want to just bring the spotlight back onto you. So I see you're a bit of a travelled man. You've lived in California, you've lived in Tonga, you've lived in Brisbane. But I want to explore some of the more personal experiences that you've had. When we interview a lot of leaders, when we interview entrepreneurs, we often come into those conversations knowing about all the amazing things that they've done. You know, and it's on the social media, it's on media, people are being interviewed left, right and centre. But what we don't really hear about are some of the behind the scenes challenges that people go through. You've mentioned briefly around you rebelling, the direction of your principal and the direction of the family to get into university. So you've done that, but I think there was a more personal home experience here with your son.
Yeah. Look, I don't really want to get too personal, even though I do respect your question. But if I may try to get a bit personal, and for me, that was the biggest adversity to be able to overcome, huh? And that was when I lost my son to cancer, leukemia. Huh? Now, he was diagnosed with cancer when he was only 8 months old. Yeah? His name is Jacoby. So he was such a fighter and also an inspiration to me. And I hardly talk about this, but I found it very hard to forgive the system. You know, when you go deep into, let's say, if you really have a look at cancer, you know, you would come across that there were cures already. When you find out about people like Dr. Royal Raymond Rife, you know, and the technology that was already there, you ask yourself, why is it that the so-called medical system refused to bring that technology to the world to save people with cancer? So again, you know, I think what hurt most is this thing called consent, or informed consent. See, I didn't. When my son Jacoby was fighting cancer, there was only one side, right? The hospital. He was up at Starship. But thinking back, there should have been another side, so that we can really have that, that informed decision to make. Because when, they offered us chemotherapy, and at the time, I thought that was best. So I signed away, And then they came back and said, hey, there's an option for Jacoby to undergo a bone marrow transplant. So again, at the time, I thought that was best. So again, we gave them permission. And those very drugs that they used to fight his cancer, those drugs cured my son. It wasn't the cancer, It wasn't the leukemia. That did not kill my son. But it was the chemotherapy and the drugs. So hence it's ongoing. I have forgiven. I had to forgive, but it's hard to forget, and that's the biggest struggle with me is knowing that it was on my shoulders. I gave them permission. Yeah? What if I said to them, look, I need time. I need a month. I need to find out more instead of giving it to them. And I don't hold any grudges against the doctors. They did a wonderful job, even with a primary oncologist. When we buried Jacoby, the primary oncologist was there. And that was really, it was a heartfelt emotion that I'll never forget. That, he was very close with Jacoby. And I was told later that because so many kids die of cancer all the time, they don't really show their emotion. But in Jacoby's case, he came, and I have forgiven the system, but it's just, I can't forget, because I guess I'm feeling guilty that it was my decision to give permission to the system. And ultimately, it was the chemotherapy and the drugs that killed my son. So that's something that I have to live with. I know, I will take it to my grave too, having that guilty conscience that, what if, what if I requested that we're given more time to really look at both sides before making that decision. But that's what it is. And I,
Hey, thank you for sharing that sort of personal side. It's not always easy, and I'm sure some of our viewers would also have similar experiences that they've either gone through or are currently going through themselves. Jacoby, personality-wise, what was he like?
He was a wonderful soul, a free spirit. It was such an experience to be at Starship for close to 6 months. So there was almost like a second home. My wife would be there 24/7, and I would be the one that would be running across. But those 6 months I will never forget. I think, Will, we talked a lot about being religious and being spiritual. Well, since Jacoby passed away, I've chosen to be more spiritual and then lesser religious, if that makes sense. I think Polynesians, and especially the Tongans, they find it hard to understand my faith now, because I still believe in God. I still believe in Jesus. However, I don't really feel that I belong to a church, like a building. So hence, even my wife and I, we still have those discussions and conflicts where she goes to church on Sundays, right? Where I don't go to church on Sundays. My church is like every time you get a chance to help someone that calls out for help. That's my religion. My religion is in helping, the love, the offer, the alofa. So that's my religion, not going to church every Sunday. Sometimes my wife gives me a hard time. So every now and then I'll come with you to church just to please her. But I'm for me, there is a difference between being religious and being spiritual. So since I lost Jacoby, I've found that I'm more spiritual and then lesser religious.
I think that's it's amazing to hear that being articulated. See, traditional religion wasn't something that I had to be part of. So I've never grown up with, my grandmother would go to church and I'd go along with her. But I think I share with you, Kenny. It's like separating religion and spirituality. And for most people, even for me, it's like, how are they different? But they're different because I think it's the soil under the church, which is more of a church. If we all stood outside on the ground, there might be more of a religious experience, something about even coming together and talking. That's probably in line with how church was ancestrally. Smaller groups, connecting, trying to manifest something between us, an energy, which I think happens on a podcast, for example. And so I think that maybe the bravery or the advocacy comes from how do we feel okay to say, for more people to say, actually, I'd like to not challenge, but ask a question without being told off. Our mutual friend, Dr. Edmund Fehoko, talks about the kava bowl and the evening of hierarchy when you're within that. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's one way of asking the question, but life needs more time to ask questions, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about culture, there are certain, let's say, traditions that we really need to hold on to. The Tongans talk about whakaapa, like respect, which is, important. However, we should be able to let our young children know that it's okay to ask the hard questions, because sometimes they get mixed up. When they're at home, they're taught the Tongan respect for whakaapa. And likewise at the church. But when they go to, let's say, university, it's different there. You really have to speak out to really understand, especially the science subjects. even at high school, you have to be able to ask the questions. I mean, we talked about the religious and the spiritual difference, and I mean, look, with all due respect to the church denominations, I mean, I grew up as a Mormon, and not everyone knows it, I grew up as a Mormon, and I attended what they called seminary for 4 years. 4 whole years. I would wake up at I think they started at 6 a.m. back in the days, in Mangere. So especially in winter, it was really cold in those winters, but yet I will get up and be at church at 6 a.m. for seminary. So 4 whole years I did seminary. So my point is, when you talk about due diligence, I've done my part. I've studied the Old Testament, the New Testament. It's just that, there are certain teachings that I really hold on to. And then others, I say to myself, well, if I can't do everything, then at least, follow the teachings of Christ that says, love your neighbor as yourself, or love thy neighbor as thyself. So those are the teachings that I rather hold on to than the others, which says, some of our Tongan and Samoan Christians, they give almost everything to the church. Well, when it comes to me, I say, no. Let's save some to look after the vulnerable people in our community. So, religion is a big part of our Polynesian culture, but maybe we should identify those that are really, appropriate in this day and age. And some of the others we can maybe, go lesser on those.
Yeah.
Interesting discussions, but if you look at the history of Polynesia being around 3,000 years, right? And you've mentioned, a culture. There are some that we should hold strongly, because I agree. And I've mentioned this in previous discussions too. That as a seafaring people, we're warrior people. We're great navigators, great explorers. We're the masters of science, technology, engineering, and maths. But even though a lot of people see us as the rugby players, war people, fighters, a huge art that people forgot that we had, or people don't really talk about, is the art of talanoa. There's a huge art within the talanoa system. And yes, we've had historic wars across Polynesia, but what we don't often discuss is how many wars were prevented through the art of talanoa, just coming together and sharing, and the art of debate. We were able to debate in the whale and solve a whole lot of, issues within the community. But we don't really encourage that as much, or it's not as visible as within my circles, because coming back to the example you used, in the church, a lot of our young kids and in some extent some women aren't, encouraged to talk or debate. Wherefore, if you go to high school, if you don't debate with the teachers, it's encouraged to debate, because that's the fact of life when it comes to, economics, in terms of, promotions and your standing within the Western sort of workplace. And so I guess that's a bit of a dilemma, is that Kennedy is one of possibly a few that wasn't afraid to voice his opinions, wasn't afraid to plant his 2 feet on the ground and say, this is what I want to do. That's what you guys want to do. But I'm the master of my waka. So this is what I want to do. And you've continued it and you have no regrets and you've overcome a whole lot of challenges. But I guess it's still quite I won't say challenge because, like you mentioned hope. There is hope that one day we can sort of elevate our people, our cultures, our denominations so that they see the benefits in teaching our people to speak up. I do a lot of work around trauma, especially around child sexual abuse, and something that consistently comes through is that people are afraid when kids do say that, oh, this relative did this to me, what do I do? And then they get a hiding and being told, oh, look, without that uncle, you wouldn't be able to come to New Zealand. So it's causing the confusion that you talked about. So I totally appreciate and understand where you're coming from. And we do need more Kennedys in the world to challenge the status quo, because otherwise it's just yes.
That's right.
Then
That's
try
right.
and clean up the mess later on. So
you need to see a Kennedy, and I've told you before, the song that I think about when I think of your name is the Johnny Cash, I Won't Back Down. You can stand me up to the gates of hell and I won't back down. And I think of you because I imagine you've told me about it. Sometimes you have to stand up in community meetings and say, I don't think this is right. And it's hard. And I actually don't know what to make of you, Kennedy, because you're somebody who I think your essence will be interflowed, but it's kind of a difficult one in some ways, because the yes people do get their name on the wall, and the no people are remembered, but within it's like an invisible trick sometimes, right?
Well, the scene is problematic.
Yeah.
The scene is problematic, but with culture and behaviours and mindsets are designed to be debated and designed to evolve and be agile, like you mentioned right at the beginning. And I think the issue we tend to have is that grey area where some with the power don't like to give up the power. But so the opportunity for us is changing the narrative for them. It's not about giving up the power. It's about improving, because when you go, these are the ones that have to try and clean up the mess. But we've come too far here in New Zealand and the US and Australia to be going backwards, But I guess that's the opportunity for us, is to try and, not to say to the ones with the power, with the knowledge, we're not saying, look, we don't agree or we don't approve or we don't appreciate what you've done, but we're the ones that have been exposed to technology. We're the ones that have been exposed to all these other different things.
And I think, if I may, we know our Polynesian history. And I'm glad that you mentioned our ancient Polynesian navigators. Right? Because they made it to the Americas 492 years before Columbus.
Yeah.
And yet in our school curriculum, who discovered America? Yeah. Columbus. Yeah. You're right. The Polynesian navigators were there 492 years before Columbus. We brought their kumara into Polynesia, and we took the chickens from Polynesia to South America. So again, the history books needs to be rewritten. But I guess the more important point is, look, we've been around 3,000 years, right? And we are probably, remember that the great human migration covered the whole of the land masses. And the only part left was the great big ocean in the Pacific. And it was our ancestors that were brave enough to venture out into the open sea and discovered all of Polynesia, One thing that I think that is important for our generation, especially post-COVID, is that we have to wake up and realize that there is a new paradigm. And I really hope that we've all learned from COVID. I'm one of the very few that have pushed for Polynesians to go back and study, their culture, even when it comes to, let's say, looking after the immune system. Our culture was, before the missionaries came, there were no obese Polynesians, right? There were no viruses, etc. So again, there's a lot of wisdom in going back and finding out, more about our culture, and then using that in this new paradigm. I mean, we talked about. I mean, that's the name of this podcast is mental wealth. One point that I need to make is this. It's a matter of perspective, because the way I see wealth will be different from the way you two see wealth. But we all agree that, the psychology is of the utmost importance. So for me, I'm more of like a minimalist. I don't really believe in, let's say, the material things. I travel light. I have an old Toyota. I remember when I was in Brisbane, and I think we talked about this. When all the other tax agents would pull up in these fancy vehicles, and here's the Tongan Robin Hood pulling up to his designated parking place in the old beat-up Toyota. So that's where I am. I think we need to break away from this Western mentality, the so-called, material competition. One family buys a big vehicle, 4x4. Then next week, the other family goes and buy a vehicle that's bigger than that. So again, our ancestors were not people of material goods. It was one big family. It was ainga, it was family, it was the Tongans. We use the term nofo akainga. That's the essence of the community, the village community, and I think we need more of that. Let's say old school or Polynesian framework, and lesser of the Western framework. So I guess that's a paradigm that I think that we should be able to step up to.
Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine who does a lot of work teaching STEM subjects out at West Auckland, he talks about the Pasifika framework is around elevating everybody, wherefore the Western one tends to focus on the individual. And that reminds me of when you're talking about the kāinga nofo, all working together, the whole village working as a collective, no one left behind. And it's something that I'm reminded of when you're speaking.
Normally, Kenny, I ask the guest, can you give your definition of what mental wealth means? But I feel like you've been doing that the whole episode. So for this episode, I'll make it special, and I won't ask you that question. But I will ask you, can you share with us a bit of hope when someone's listening, if they're going through a tough time, or they want to bank that hope for when life comes for them? What would you say?
Thank you, Will. If I may, answer the first question anyways, to be fair to all the others,
That's so
it's almost like I don't want to be given, like, let's say, a special treatment. It's unfair on the others.
This is the advocacy.
So let's be fair to everyone.
But you're the only one with a superhero named Tongan Robin Hood, all right?
Yeah. Look, back to what I think about when you say mental wealth, for me, I would say this. Yeah. First and foremost, be yourself. Yeah? Be yourself. Yeah? Live your passion. And lastly, be happy. Yeah? Sometimes we get so lost in our world that we forget that the meaning of life is to be happy. Yeah? So if you're happy having a bowl of kava with your Tongan friends, yeah, do that. Huh? I mean, wealth means people have their own different meaning of wealth. But for me, again, if I can repeat, be yourself, live your passion, and be happy. So that's my take on mental wealth, because again, for an activist like myself, and for a very staunch advocate for indigenous philosophies and indigenous worldviews, it's we don't believe in the material belongings. I mean, even I once challenged in my writings at the University of Auckland, I took on John Locke against the theory of private property. I mean, that's the essence of the indigenous philosophy. We are only caretakers. Yeah? When you talk about land, we are here to look after the land. And we bring up our children to be able to do the same. When we are gone, they continue to look after the land. I mean, even, with all due respect to tangata whenua, but even with the Polynesian people, we're all part of the indigenous peoples in the world. And our philosophy is different from that of the West and the East. So hence, my take on the importance of going back to our roots. Because if we study our roots, we'll go deeper and deeper and find out that, there's certain indigenous philosophies that binds us all, whether it's the Aborigine people of Australia or the tangata whenua of New Zealand, or the Tongans and the Samoans, where we're all tied together with this indigenous worldview, and I push further and I call it indigenous philosophy.
Nice. Beautiful.
Nice. Brother, Tongan Robin Hood.
Superhero.
Doko. I could probably honestly say that you've helped raise the IQ of this podcast, the two brothers here, and I just want to part by saying, bless you in the awesome work that you've done. May your advocacy continue to bring warmth to a lot of our people that need it across the country, or any other clients and members of the community that you're working with. Bless you and your family whilst you're out there trying to save the world and being a philanthropic. With your time, your labour, your expertise, I pray that in your times of need, that you also get the reciprocated love and support from the many networks of people that you're out there fighting for. I'm blessed to have met you for the first time today. I heard a lot about you through Will, and we're always in awe of every guest that that we've had come through the store, and I can say hand on heart that you're one of them, and I appreciate you and everything that you've been doing, Toko. But thank you very much for taking part in our mental wealth podcast, and I pray that you continue to do more awesome work out there for our people.
Yeah, whawhetai te le lava inu. Pleasure for me to be invited, and also to my good friend Will. Once again, thank you. Kia kaha. Malo apita.